Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. This most recent War Within beta build technically went live, but for some reason we didn't get a full list of all the different class changes. Instead, every few hours, we're getting some big swings of class tuning. But all of these things, buffs and nerfs, are coming and going so fast that it's really hard to settle down and give a full rundown of everything that has happened on the beta. So I'm just gonna kind of hold off until we get a proper blue post so we can talk about all of the changes officially. However, speaking of class buffs, I did miss out one class that I've actually gotten some significant improvements last week, and that is the class of Druid. As hero specs such as Guardian of the Grove and Druid of the Claw in particular are seeing some mad improvements, with Feral, Guardian, Boomkin, and even Restoration Druids receiving some form of buffs, big and small. And I kind of wanted to really do a bit of a deeper dive at everything that the class of Druids have seen over this past week. As always, if you guys want to see regular War Within beta updates, follow the channel and subscribe. Otherwise, let's dive right in. Starting things off, we have more generalized changes with the hero talents up front and forward. Starting things off with the Druid of the Claw, available for both Guardian and Feral Druid, and this one saw significant gains for both of those two playstyles. For Feral in particular, for them, mostly it's been all about running around as a Wild Stalker, a bleed-focused Feral, so Druid of the Claw is getting some buffs and support to hopefully make it more even. It's hard to tell if that's going to be enough, but it even spawned Druids running a very unorthodox build with a Pointed Tireless Energy, a Pointed Carnivorous Instinct, not running Feral Frenzy, not picking up a Vein Ripper or Rip and Tear, and instead focusing on Saber Jaws, which is very unusual. But I guess it makes sense if you're trying to play a playstyle that's all about big bites, you would want to try to amplify those bites as much as humanly possible. So that makes sense in that regard. That being said, when it comes to Druids, there are some generalized changes that will affect both Guardian and Feral Druid, things such as the Ruthless Aggression, where Ravage will increase your auto attack speed by 35% for 6 seconds. This one's going to be kind of more significant for Feral and Guardian to some degree because there's some auto attack improvements, but we'll get to that when we get to that. On the flip side, if you do end up picking up Killing Strikes, the agility gain from Killing Strikes is going to be increased to 8% for 8 seconds instead of 6%, which is, or rather 5%, which is a nice gain for this talent as well. With Strike for the Heart, the critical strike damage as well as critical strike chance for some of your basic Feral and Guardian abilities are being increased to 10%, which is a decent gain. But also Tear Down the Mighty does give you a little bit more cooldown reduction for either your Feral Frenzy or Pulverize, which is a small change, but a nice change that could potentially allow Feral Druids to maybe adjust that Feral Frenzy window so you could use it more aggressively, and it lines up a little bit better around your Tiger's Fury a little bit more readily. But that's just a contextual thing that will really depend on the situation. I think for Feral Druids, it would have been much better if Feral Frenzy lined up with Tiger's Fury every time, 30 seconds to 30 seconds. I think that would have been a little bit better, because having that 5-second shift that kind of drifts a little bit over time, I think it's just going to be just as weird as having Feral Frenzy on a 45-second cooldown all on its own. You know what I mean? As for Feral changes, Druid of the Claw got adjustments where Ravage priority target damage is being amped by 35%, so that's bigger bites for that singular target. Dreadful Bleed that applies after you use Ravage, which is a bleed effect, that one is amplified for Feral Druids by 17%. This one also gains all the snapshot benefits and mastery benefits of Feral Druid, which is kind of decent also. Empowered Shapeshifting talent is going to be increasing the damage of your Shredded Swipe by 6% instead of 3%, if that is a choice you want to make. However, if you do end up playing into Wild Power Surge, which a lot of Druids were wondering if you are going to be doing this whole bear shifting kind of damage, Wild Power Surge has been amplified recently, where the damage of your Mangle, when you finally achieve the full stacks of this talent, is increased by 300%, while your next swipe is increased by 75%. I mean, the damage is kind of okay. I guess it's like a slightly better shred. I really do think that damage needs to be a lot higher. Yeah, I don't know. Mangle needs to do a lot more damage though. I feel like Mangle needs to do a ton more damage in order to be worth it, but the actual Brutal Slash Wall and Bear form, that damage seems to be kind of okay. I don't think that'll be enough on its own to get Druids playing Wild Power in a really active way or anything. I really think they need to give this one a bigger payoff. Maybe like let it stack for quite a while or something, but let it have some decent payoff behind it at the very bare minimum. Now, besides this little detour that we gotta do, let's go back to the Druid of the Claw with Bestial Strength for the Amplified, increasing bite damage by 10% and Primal Wrath by 60%. Another big improvement for Feral Druids when it comes to the overall damage. Quickly shifting over to the Guardian Druid, Druid of the Claw continues to get additional buffs and changes, with the Ravage primary damage increased by 35%, just like the Feral Druid, but the Dreadful Wound Bleed is actually being amplified by 25%, since Druid of the Claw Guardian Druids won't have any natural bleed benefits, or at least similar bleed benefits like you do with the Feral Druid and the Mastery that enhances bleed damage further. For the Talent of Empowered Shapeshifting, the damage of your Mangle has been increased by 15%. This is a very significant change. With Bestial Strength, the damage of your Maul and Rage is further increased to 20%. Also another good change both for the damage as well as the Druid overall survivability with things like Ursoc's Fury. But for Bear Druid, Wild Power Surge is actually worth it, where Mangle grants feline potential, and after you have 6 stacks, the damage of your next bite or bleed of Rip in cat form is increased by 225%, and the effect naturally will grant you instantly 5 common points as soon as you shapeshift into cat form. This is actually kind of significant, mostly because for Guardian Druids, the payoff for this playstyle is actually real. And now that I got another 6 stacks, I'm gonna go for a bite this time around, and if you see the damage that this thing does, I mean, the Rip by itself could deal a significant bit of damage, 1.9 million over its duration. Or you can go for an immediate bite for about 800k, although if it crits, it can do significantly more damage than that. And for Guardian Druids in particular, this playstyle is actually kind of exciting as long as it does enough significant damage, because for Guardian Druids, your rotation, like your basic bear rotation, is kind of plain, but being able to add cat weaving as part of your rotation, I think is an exciting bit of gameplay that isn't super complex or complicated, and they're trying to support it as much as they can, where I would have loved to see bear weaving for like a big powerful attack for Feral Druid, which you haven't really been able to see so far, except for maybe like Brutal Slash in some cases. But for Guardian, the bite or the bleed can actually be kind of huge bit of overall damage. And to me, this one is actually very, very exciting, because for the most part, we've seen Druids running around with Illusion's Chosen. That has been kind of the staple playstyle, so they're really trying to amplify Druid of the Claw, and I'm excited to see if Druid of the Claw will have some teeth on it in order to be able to stand apart from the rest of the crowd and actually be a viable playstyle going forward, because I love the base gameplay. It really just kind of buffs up all the basic physical damage output of a Guardian Druid, weaving in the cat abilities. I really personally like a lot, but I wonder if this set of changes will be enough in order to make him kind of like a preferred or even playable option going forward. Then with that, we have to move on to other hero specs, because we got a lot to take a look at. But Guardian, as well as Feral, Druid of the Claw, seeing significant improvements. For Boomkin, we do have Keeper of the Grove, which is seeing some adjustments as well, like the Dream Surge damage ability has been amplified by 25%. The durability of Nature Talent, which doesn't seem like it actually has been implemented yet, but in the blip post it says that the health increase of these treants is supposed to be increased by 100% instead of 50% if you do keep them a little bit more on the tanky side versus the more aggressive melee side. In Mahogany or Grove, you do get a slight increase in terms of the burst value for every single one of those treants. They increase your spell damage by 8% per treant instead of 6%, so that's 3 trees that you summon at once, so you're looking at about a 24% damage burst window. From there on, we can take a look at Balanced Druids a little bit and take a look at some of the different changes they've gotten specifically. For Boomkin, we're seeing a 6% damage buff for all of your spells all across the board, with certain specific spells further amplified, such as Force of Nature Treants baseline melee damage increased by 60%. Though in logs, from what I've been able to see, and they haven't really been a lot of Balanced Druid logs from this week in particular, but from the logs that we do have from Druids that are trying out the playstyle, it doesn't seem like the Force of Nature Treants have significantly more damage or anything like that. And I mean, they are punching and they're doing a little bit more damage than before, so I guess overall as a cooldown they are more effective, but a good portion of that overall damage is going to come from the Dream Burst ability as well. So it isn't just a way for you to be able to buff up the damage of your treants but it's kind of like a combo that applies together. So I guess if you were to take Dream Burst plus the Treant damage together, I guess together that could be a bit of a significant overall damage. It's just one of those numbers that it looks like, wow, 60% damage buff, that's gonna be massive, but then overall it's like, it's decent from what we've seen. Besides this though, Wild Mushroom's damage is amplified by 20% and they generate slightly more astral power. Talents such as Umbral Inspiration are actually getting quite a bit of players recently, with the damage bonus for this one being increased to 35% up from 30, and that's a 35% increase for all of your Moonfire, Sunfire, Stellar Flare, Shooting Stars, and Starfalls after consuming Umbral Embrace talent, which is one above that. The Denizens of the Dream damage has been amplified by 10%. Astral Communion now generates you 25 astral power instead of 20, so slight gain there. And also the tier set for balanced druids, which hopefully has actually been adjusted, now increases the Star Surge damage by 10% and Starfall damage by 14%, which is a bit of an uptick, like a 2% damage increase or 8% to 10% gain for Star Surge, as well as a 10 to 14% gain for Starfall. Also, with the aforesaid, Lunar Eclipse and Solar Eclipse each increase the astral power generation of Wrath by 2 and Starfire by 5, which used to be a Wrath going from 1 to a 2, with Starfire going from like a 2 to a 5, so slightly more resource generation during your eclipses. To continue the trend of gains, Feral Druid gains even more changes and even more additions, not just from the Druid of the Claw, but the spec itself also gets additional updates, such as a 30% buff to your auto attacks, which may not seem significant because ferals are mostly about bleeds and big bites, but auto attacks are a significant portion of your damage, and feral druids auto attacks actually hit kind of rather quickly. So a direct damage gain to auto attacks is a single target damage increase overall regardless. Blades such as Rip, Rake, and Thrash, all those periodic effects are amplified by 5%. That's always a good change that every Feral Druid is going to take every single time. And they're also trying to make Incarnation as an ability a little bit better by, first of all, trying to change it so Incarnation now provides you 25% energy cost reduction instead of 20 to make that burst cooldown a little bit better. But they're also trying to make Ashamane's guidance for Incarnation even better, with increasing the after effect of Ashamane's guidance to 40 seconds after Incarnation ends instead of 30, which gives you a bigger burst window for Rip and Rake to increase the amount of damage enemies take, to try to give you a much bigger burstier window for the playstyle in general, and try to give you something that's a little bit more competitive to convoke the spirits in particular. And with some of the different baseline changes for Berserk, like giving it a 15% attack and ability damage increase baseline, it could potentially make Incarnation possibly a really good button to use. And the last change is going to come from Savage Fury, which they're trying to make a little bit better. They're increasing the haste provided by Savage Fury from 8% to 10%, and the energy recovery rate from 20% to 25%. Though with this talent, after Tiger's Fury, after you activate it, the Savage Fury passive only lasts for 6 seconds, and I feel like this talent maybe would have been a little better if it had a longer duration, or if it did something different that just increased your haste. And I know haste is a decent stat for Feral Druids, like it's not the greatest stat, Crit and Mastery are a little bit better, but haste does have its place in the Feral Druid playstyle. But I kind of wish this talent maybe had like crit damage window, which I think would have made it really cool as like a big bursty element, or like a mastery increase, or some kind of like a damage amplification effect or something. Or if it simply just lasted a little bit longer, which gave you a little bit better energy management and energy usage as soon as you activate your Tiger's Fury effect. And from there on, once you covered Balance, Feral, we also get to move on to Guardian, which gains buffs, I guess, to some degree. I guess they're technically buffs depending on the playstyle that you want to play. For Guardian Druid, and we're seeing tank buffs all across the board, melee auto attacks as well as all bear ability damage is buffed by 20%, which is a significant gain for Guardian Druids in particular. That is a lot of damage increase. However, Moonfire damage has been reduced kind of to match all of these different buffs. So if you were excited to play Guardian with this 20% buff as a Loon's Chosen, they're trying to limit viability, or the scope of a Loon's Chosen, not the viability, because it's a very strong option and kind of the better option over Druid of the Claw for the most part, but they're really trying to limit its, like, I guess, lead as best as they can. So Moonfire damage is kind of being reverted from any of these changes. Also, Twin Moonfire damage increase for Moonfire has been reduced to 8% instead of 10. They're really trying to make Druid of the Claw a viable option for Guardian Druids. It looks like the Moon Druids have been dominating so far, but maybe one day they can get the tuning right where Druid of the Claw will actually get a lot more viability, and hopefully it'll be a viable choice going forward. Though while we've been talking about buffs all across the board, Restoration Druids got some buffs, quote unquote. I mean, I guess there are buffs, but there's also a bit of a caveat to it as well. I had to do a little bit of research to really see just what these buffs really mean and what they actually could be, like whether they're actually good or not. But there are some nerfs for Restoration Druids also. First thing first, starting off with the ability to Convoke, they're adding 4 extra additional spells for Restoration Druids in particular that you are able to use during the time of Convoke the Spirits. So for Restore in particular, you get to use 4 additional spells, which hopefully should improve a little bit of the RNG of the ability, because Druids have been running into a situation where Convoke will sometimes focus on dealing damage and wrathing the boss instead of healing an ally, and you would use Convoke as like a burst heal ability. Right now, Druids are playing kind of like a slot machine build, where sometimes Convoke just won't even heal a guy you need to heal until the very last few seconds, and by then, that's where they fall into trouble. So maybe they need to make Convoke like use Restoration Druid abilities immediately during his first like few seconds, and then some of the other spells towards the tail end, like all the damage spells. But it just, the randomness does make Druids feel like they're playing basically a walking slot machine rather than a walking healing tree. For talents such as Embrace the Dream, they did see like a 50% healing increase, which is kind of nice, I guess. With talents like Regenesis, that is a healing increase for rejuvenation by up to 30% if you're putting all of your talent points into it, which I guess is kind of nice also. With the talent of Power of the Archdruid, you now have a 60% chance to activate the talent instead of 40%. Again, we're talking about Druids being a slot machine. Restoration Druids would prefer to have this talent be potentially a guaranteed proc, where maybe after so many seconds your next wild growth grants you the Power of the Archdruid or something. Like some kind of consistency where the talent can at least proc regularly instead of having to deal with RNG, because you can roll really badly and not get benefits out of a talent also. Tree of Life is seeing a small reduction where its overall healing is being reduced from 50% down to 10%, and increases the healing of Reju from 50% down to 40%, which seems more like a raid tuning change rather than like a dungeon tuning change. Though with talents such as Reforestation, where you do get Tree of Life from time to time, that is going to be a bit of a nerf in that regard also. The ability of Nourish has also gotten buffed by 100%, which seems like a big number, which is a really nice change, but trees are so hard to give up. Like, talk to any Restoration Druid right now, and trees with Grove Guardians, whether you're playing Keeper, even if you're playing Wildstalker, trees are so hard to give up. They would, I feel like, need to find a way to incorporate Nourish as an ability into some of the hero talent trees in order to make the ability a little bit better. And yeah, trees are just way too good, man. Talents like Flourish have also been amplified a little bit, although they're competing right now for sentences, so you don't always take Flourish, but Flourish now gives you a 8-second duration of healing over time increases rather than a 6 one, which is a good change. We take those. Restoration Druid, though, however, did get some nerfs primarily from his damage. Feral abilities such as Rake, your Rip, your Bite, as well as your Shred, all nerfed by 15%, as well as the damage of Sunfire also nerfed by 15%, which is a bit of an ouchie. Certain abilities such as Thrash, for example, did get nerfed, auto attacks didn't get nerfed, Moonfire didn't get nerfed, but yeah, a good portion of your overall damage, or at least a big parts of your feral damage, did I mention Bite? Bite also got nerfed. A good portion of your feral abilities plus your AoE damage has been cut down by a significant amount, which is kind of blows, kind of sucks. It also does make playstyles such as Call of the Elder Druid and Dream of Cenarius a little bit worse, because the Dream of Cenarius specifically scales its swipe damage as well as shred damage based off of the ability damage, so it can provide like a party heal, but if you're nerfing the damage of shred, you kind of nerfing this heal as well, which I'm not a big fan of at the end of the day. And also apparently they changed up their mastery. There was apparently a bit of a discrepancy with the mastery for Restoration Druids, and they fixed it, an issue that caused Mastery Harmony to gain an extra stack on all targets. And I'm not a Restoration Druid main, so I'm not going to tell you exactly what this means in terms of the scope of this change. But from what I've been told, it's roughly like a 10% blanket nerf potentially for Restoration Druids, depending on how bad this bug really was. I'm not 100%, I'm just kind of going off of a number that I've heard, so really don't quote me, take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, out of all the different Druid specs, it looks like Restoration Druids does see technically some buffs here and there, although it's usually buffs through talents that are not as picked, or at least currently picked as much over on the beta, or maybe can be picked, but in very key situations, though it doesn't really address some of the slot machine RNG aspects of the class, which some druids are really not keen about. But yeah, technically it's buffs, just buffs that some druids are probably not going to end up utilizing unless they really need those specific talents in those very specific situations. Then with that being said, that's literally going to be everything that has happened to the class of Druid so far, and overall I feel like it's actually been kind of fun to play around with, especially on a Feral Druid. I feel like the Feral Druid changes have been kind of fun, and playing around with the Druid of the Claw in particular has been a blast. I am hoping that they will at least make Druid of the Claw kind of sort of a playable playstyle for Guardian Druids in particular, or at least like get it as close to a tuning as they can between Guardian of Lunar or the Lune's Chosen playstyle versus the proper, you know, Druid of the Claw, physical damage, bleed bear Druid, because I would love to be able to play around with a cat weaving playstyle. I personally like that as a mechanic. I think it's interesting for Guardian in particular. Would have loved for that bear weaving thing to be a little bit more significant for Feral Druids, or getting a bit more play for Feral Druids in particular, but I guess time will tell if maybe they'll do additional changes. Though for Druids, there are still some issues, like for example, their class challenge tree. At the end of the day, a lot of Druids are not super satisfied with it. It's a bit too rigid, and to pick up some of the more valuable, I guess, utility, you are still locked down behind quite a few gates of talents that are quite expensive. Like for example, if let's say you're playing a Feral Druid, and you're playing like a full Guardian of Druid of the Claw build, where you're not using Sunfire on Moonfire, and you don't really need Rejuvenation or Wild Growth, you still have to pick up 2 points to Lower the Grove just to pick up Iterate for your party. You know what I mean? So a lot of Druids still would have loved to see a huge restructure when it comes to their talents, but this late into the expansion, highly doubt it's going to be happening. But I would love to see something like this come to Druids as early as possible, but like 0.5 patch update or something. I think something that is probably a must. I've been playing a lot of classes on the beta and really been doing a little bit more deep dives into them. And yeah, the Druid talent tree, there is a little bit of awkwardness behind it, and I wonder if they can adjust it at some point in the future. Though with everything being said, I did want to thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I hope all of you enjoyed. And if you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very much appreciate that. And as always, join our Discord community. Link to that is the description of every single one of the videos. And let me know your thoughts about everything that has happened to the class of the Druid so far. What do you like? What do you dislike? And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.